Good afternoon, this is Bowdee, January 3rd, 2018. I'm going to do a real quick podcast about my experiences learning how to fly a helicopter. I knew nothing about a helicopter other than I liked them, and it had taken to the point where I was done with high school. I had moved out of the house. I had moved to a new city, and the thing that sparked my interest in helicopters was going to a meeting. It was from a friend. He was an insurance agent and kind of a mentor friend of mine. He actually ended up being one of the best men in my wedding, but he invited me to this conference about a company called Helimission. And Helimission was a missionary organization that used helicopters to fly missionaries into remote parts of the bush where it was inaccessible by roads, and helicopter was like the main way to get there. They did use bush planes in that organization as well, but most of it all was helicopters. So that sparked my interest in it, and I decided I wanted to learn how to fly a helicopter. So this was right about internet time, I guess. For me, 99, I was, freshly married, and I remember we moved to this first apartment, and I got my first personal computer in 2000 and was using AOL dial-up, the noise that we had to listen to in order to get on the internet. But before that, this was right at the cusp of that. What you did before that was to go to the library, and so I went to the library. I checked out every book I could get on helicopters and read them cover to cover, which wasn't a problem. Usually if I find a subject I'm interested in, I can finish a book in one day, and that's how my interest leads me. That my learning style is a little bit my own, but I've come to appreciate it. So after learning as much as I could out of books out of the library, I turned to the internet, and I was using that as a resource to learn about the different missionary organizations that were out there. And then I had to decide to find a flight instructor. And so I started looking for a flight instructor, and obviously a flight instructor needs to have a helicopter, so more than likely that's going to lead you to an airport. Not so much a specific heliport, because those are kind of spread out, few and far between, but an airport is where somebody does most of their training for a helicopter as well. So I had to find not only an airport with a helicopter, but also with a flight instructor, and so that took some doing, that took some time. There was a lot of time that passed that I was still working, and some moves involved, and eventually I got to the point where I was ready to start my flight training. I had found a place. By that time I was living over in the middle of the state, and I was traveling over to the east side of the state. So originally when I was interested in helicopters, I was on the west side of Michigan, and then at this point when I started my training, I was living on the east side of Lansing and Mason, and then I was doing my flight training over in Lowell, and then later on over by Detroit in Howell. So through the process, I went through a couple different instructors. Since my main interest in helicopters was tied in with missionary work, and I wanted to be a missionary helicopter pilot, I really got inspired that that's what I wanted to do. There was a missionary aviation training school in Lowell, which was only about 45 minutes from my house, so I decided there was a great place to start. So originally, my learning how to fly helicopters, I rode in an airplane. I had to do a few hours in an airplane, and they were testing my aptitude and seeing if it was something that I could grasp a hold of, and before letting me in the helicopter, because they had a helicopter, but they didn't keep insurance on it all the time, because it's like $10,000 a year, and they didn't have any students. So if they were going to put the insurance on the helicopter to do some training with somebody, they want to make sure it was somebody they were going to be able to do a few hours with. So I ended up doing my first few hours in an airplane, and then I got to do my first few hours in a helicopter, and I still remember that moment, the very first time I got to ride in a helicopter for the first time, and it was the awesomest thing. It was so cool to be able to just float and rise up above the ground. You got this whirling noise and just this massive energy, and things are shaking around you, and it feels like the ground is shaking, and that you're just rising above it all, and then the next thing you know, you're flying. It's just the coolest thing in the world. To this day, I can't wait to get back and continue my training. So after doing a few hours at the School of Missionary Aviation Training in Lowell, SMAT, I can't remember if it was from a move or whatnot. I think that was pretty much it, because I was married and my wife was going to med school, and so we moved from med school over so she could go to Michigan State. And so it was a little bit difficult to find helicopter flight instructors. They're not everywhere. So the one that I found was like an hour east of Mason in Howell, and I went and did a sample flight with him, or with his organization. Well, I didn't actually meet my flight instructor the first time. When I went to go do the sample flight, I did it with a guy named Siggy, and he was like a senior pilot with the helicopter business that I was going to look at. And then later Siggy left, and Tom came in, and Tom was my instructor, and he was brand new. He had just gotten his certified flight instructor license, so I was his very first student. After I've had time to look back on this experience, this was 2003, 2004 when I was doing that training. I don't think I would pick a brand new flight instructor. If I would have had other instructors available to me, and later on I did find one that was a senior instructor, been flying for much longer, and he was actually way closer to me in Fowlerville. There was another guy with the same last name as me, actually, Bowden. And so, if I would have known about him, I would have picked him, and I think I would have had better results. But basically, I can't blame anybody but myself. I got to as far as I could get before I ran out of money. I put $10,000 into it, and that got me to the point where I could solo in a Robinson R-22 helicopter. So when I first did my training over at SMAT, I was in a Hughes 269C, which is what the military trains with. It's just the real metally looking one with the big bubble on the front, and not as advanced of a machine, definitely not a Robinson. I was very happy. One of the things, I was very happy choosing a Robinson for my helicopter of choice. One of the things you have to do when you're picking your flight training is not only take into account, the price is really the last of it. If it's going to be expensive no matter what. Helicopters 2 to 3 times, more like 3 to 4 times the cost of doing an airplane, because at the time I paid $75 an hour for the airplane, and the helicopter was $250 an hour. And I'm sure it's gone up since then. Now we're in 2018. I have no idea what it costs. It probably costs $300, $350 an hour. But you get into turbine helicopters, and they can cost as much as $700 an hour to do your training in them. The same cost that you'd pay to rent it, because you still are using the helicopter and you're using the pilot. It just so happens that your pilot is a flight instructor, and so he's able to train you. So I was very glad that I did my training in a Robinson. I love that machine. It is a very precise, nimble machine. When Siggy took me for a ride and he was trying to interest me in the program, he did something that he called just a little bit of chocolate. And so at the end of the flight, where he took me out to I didn't do any of the controls. I just got to ride in a Robinson, and he did some explaining to me. But on the way back in, he kind of dove down through the trees and kind of zigzag weaved back and forth between the trees, and it was kind of, for a second, it was like going into a high-speed movie. If you could imagine a virtual reality machine, where you're riding on a helicopter, that was it. But it was real life. And so after that, I was hooked, man. I had to do training. That was what I wanted more than anything in my life. it consumed me. It consumed my conversations with people. It was my all in all encompassing every day. That was what I wanted more than anything, become a missionary helicopter pilot. And so 2004, I got to the point where I soloed, and that, you know, still brings back awesome memories when I think about that day. It was not even planned, you know. I was going to training. You do it an hour at a time, and so I would a lot of times I was fortunate and thankful to be able to have the experiences that I had. I at the time, you know, I was married to a doctor in training, and she knew doctors, and the doctors needed house sitting services because they went to Africa in the winter, and so we were house sitting a farmhouse on 5 acres in Mason. And I would take my brand new motorcycle that I was fortunate enough to purchase because I had gotten a good factory job, and I just made it a priority that I'm a motorcycler. I grew up riding 3-wheelers and motorcycles, mopeds, dirt bikes, and when I turned 18, that's the first thing I did is bought a crotch rocket. So I've been riding all my life, and I wanted to make that a priority to have a bike. So leaving from Mason, taking the bike an hour to go to Howell to go fly helicopters for an hour, that was a dream come true. I loved it. It was so awesome, and I was just doing it, you know, as much as I could once a week. We actually had money from the student loans that were for living expenses, and you know, we were using that to do some of my training because I had a good job, and I had made sure to pay for my wife's college up until, you know, all of her pre-med stuff up until med school, because we don't want to have any pre-med debt going into regular med school debt, which you know, that can get really pricey. It's about $250,000 in debt that you're going to have after becoming a doctor. So you know, we were responsible with our money. We had a budget. We did the envelope system, and we just took care of it. And so we had the money, and I was fortunate enough to be able to put this into flight training. And so I was going an hour here, an hour there, and then next thing you know, one day I show up, and he's like, okay, well, you know, you did the takeoffs, you did the landings, we just flew over to this place, you know, 20 miles away or whatever it is, and we just came back. And I just, you know, that's the way it is when you're an apprentice. You learn from the master, and you await instructions. And so I would do the instruction, and then I would await instruction, and I would do the instruction, and I would await instruction. So we had just finished flying over to this other airport and come back. I just done it, and then he's like, all right, I'm gonna get out, and you're gonna do that again without me. The helicopter is gonna act a little bit different without the weight in the left side, because when you fly a helicopter, you're on the right side. So he told me to compensate for the weight a little bit, but then yeah, take off, go, and boom, I did it. I flew over there and did the same thing I had just done. I did all the takeoffs and landings and radio calls and navigation, and it was awesome. It was so cool. When I come back, you know, I didn't even realize that was going to be my solo day until I came back. And he's like, well, let's walk up to the office and I'll get your picture taken and get it printed out. And we did. And so that was the day I soloed in a Robinson R-22 helicopter in May of 2004, I believe. So that was the process that I went through to learn how to fly a helicopter, and I hope you found some use out of this video. If you like my videos, watch some more of them, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.